Hey, everybody. Welcome to Awakener Podcast. We've got a great show for you today.
Maybe not. He's hungry.
Oh, yeah, I'm hungry. I'm miserable because I'm hungry. But here we are. We got an awesome show for you today. So before I begin, once again, it's theawakener.ca. Theawakener.ca is your best resource for figuring out what on earth is going on with all this madness. Now, the Awakener Podcast is a little bit different, okay? So we don't do shows every single day. The reason why we don't do shows every single day is there's so much information and so many things happening and all these theories and all this stuff about what's going on. It's very easy to understand what's going on. We just don't want to overcomplicate things. You just got to go, once again, theawakener.ca, and you view the story and you keep up to date with the shows and the Patreon, and you'll know exactly what's going. Basically, it was almost the defeat of the Western world, and something great has happened, which is Trump, and now it's going to be amazing. I can't even talk about what's going to happen in the future because it's going to be so glorious for us, and I'm looking forward to it. So I have the Insider with me. Insider, how are you?
I'm doing great, Awakener. How are you?
Good. So we have so much to talk about. I'm not going to talk over top of you this time. We are going to have a great show. Let's begin. So first thing we got to start off with Iran and Israel. Everyone's talking about it. Iran hasn't done anything yet.
Right, exactly. And don't expect Iran to do anything because they know that if they do anything, other than just a token gesture, Israel will wipe them off the face of the earth.
So now this is the thing. Okay, so we talked about it on the podcast last time. What did Israel do after Iran launched 300 missiles? And you remember that, Insider? What did they do? They launched one missile that hit right next to the nuclear site. So I wrote an article on the awakener.ca talking about how is Israel going to destroy Iran's nuclear program. So they warned Iran. They sent one missile right beside it. Ding! We purposely missed it, but we could easily have taken it out. Now, Iran knows that if they do something, what's going to happen? I would imagine that there is probably going to be an attack on that nuclear site. As you know, Iran does not want this to happen. The reason why is they need nuclear weapons to obviously defeat Israel. They need nuclear weapons to control Saudi Arabia because this is an internal battle within Islam itself. This is very crazy what's going on. So I do not expect Iran to do much, to be honest with you. I kind of said that last time. I still don't expect Iran to do much because Israel is going to have to do something in return, and that return is Iran's nuclear program. Now, in regards to Iran's nuclear program, everything you hear on the news is completely fake. So Iran has had a nuclear weapon since 1992. So Kazakhstan, when the Soviet Union collapsed, just Google LA Times. So LA Times, Kazakhstan, Iran nuclear weapons, and you'll find out that Iran had got 2 miniature nuclear weapons in 1992 from the Soviet Union collapse. Now, start thinking for a second here. So Iran has these engineers. People go to university, schools, whatever the case may be. How long would it take them to disassemble these nuclear weapons and kind of come up with a plan to make their own? 2 years. Mm-hmm. So Iran has had nuclear weapons since 1995. Okay? The reason they don't use them, what is the reason they don't use them? Is because of consequence. The consequence is the US would nuke them. Okay? This is why there is a battle on the United States of America and why they're saving Israel for last. Because they can't have Israel with the United States of America ready to nuke them. Right. So, Insider, we talked about that before. What are your latest thoughts regarding this?
Like we've said, Iran is just going to be saber rattling. They're not going to be able to do anything. Right. Israel has the power here. Israel has the strength. And even with Joe and Kamala in the White House, there's little that Iran can do to attack Israel.
Now, Israel's noticing this, and Israel's going on the offensive. Israel's going into Lebanon. I would imagine that Israel's going to go to Iran again because if you're not going to do anything to us, we're going to hit you even harder. And this is going to continue in my point of view. So the reason this is happening, this war, is very complicated. Again, you have to go on the awakener.ca. Israel knows that there was a grand, epic invasion that was going to be pinned on it during Hillary's presidency by the very end. So they're using this information to advance their territories to prepare for Iran to do something. Iran has launched a network of EMP weapons we've talked about on the show. Nobody knows about that yet. And obviously, Iran is planning in the next few days to launch 14, they call imaging satellites from China. I don't believe they're imaging satellites whatsoever. They're a network of communication satellites. So basically, if there's an all-out war, there's a method to communicate on the ground through the various satellite network. So watch the news, watch what is happening. It's going to be crazy. Now, I guess we have to move on. So if we move on, we're going to talk about some more positive things. That is the DNC convention. Insider, what's the latest? The DNC convention, let's just summarize it, okay? I'm going to summarize the DNC
Go
convention
ahead.
for you right now. It's a bunch of losers.
Okay, that's
Bunch of losers getting together. The
that's
reason why they're
easy.
losers is because they're communists. They don't know what the agenda is. And this is precisely what we talked about on the show on the Awakener.ca. The left wing does not know. All they do is point fingers to the right wing and say, oh my goodness, the right wing has a conspiratorial U.S. military-industrial complex behind it. They're all about pro-oil. Okay, you got us. The left carries underneath it, it's not socialism, they carry a hidden Soviet communist military machine.
That's right. And I think most of the people that went to the DNC convention don't really understand that, because a lot of we're talking about women's rights and abortion and killing babies, and they were offering free vasectomies at the DNC convention.
Right. So everyone in the Western world having babies, please abort them. Please stop having kids so that we can outbreed you. And then there's nothing left of the Western world in 50 years' time. It's a war. It's not really about abortion. It's not really about
it's not about women's rights.
Vasectomies. It's not about women's rights, because they're going to all put a hijab on you in 50 years' time.
Right. And on top of it, they don't care about women's rights, because they're allowing men to pretend to be women, to compete in women's sports and beat the crap out of women. Right. So if you care about women's rights, you won't want men to punch the face of a woman at the Olympics. The other thing that's going on, they're talking about how they are so pro-life, and yet they're all talking about abortion. So they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. They're saying one thing, they're not doing they're doing the opposite. They were always bashing Trump. They had no policies to talk about. No one at the convention could talk about what's Kamala's economic plan. The biggest economic plan she's come up with is taxing people's assets based on their increased value.
The capital gains tax that she wants to, it would be a death wish to America.
Absolutely.
So what is the point of waking up in the morning and working hard and starting your own business and doing all this hard work to benefit yourself or your family? There's zero. When there's zero ability to
incentive
to gain or have incentive to gain the hierarchy, then society just collapses. This is what the Democrats are selling. Everything they sell, the left wing sells, is collapse of the Western world. This is why all these fools, these idiots and losers, don't know that there's a hidden communist Soviet. Do you know that I was at my gym, and I walked out of my gym in Toronto, and these people on the side of the street were handing out pamphlets, and it was all about communism. Communism, the Communist Party, pro this, and I literally across the street, I started yelling at them. It's like, screw you guys. Like, it's gotten to a point now where it's so obvious.
It's so open.
And you can't, you have to be nice to people, but you can't be nice to people. You have to tell people to shove it.
No,
nice way.
And you could see it even at outside the DNC, the pro-Palestinian protesters. It's the same thing. They're pro-Marxist, they're pro-Palestinian, they're pro-communism. It's all part and parcel of the same thing.
Right. So now to break it down once again, okay, so to tie everything into this, okay, so the globalist people and George Soros who work together are passing worldwide communism. So this is not about Mother Russia. This is not about Vladimir Putin. This is not about some Soviet leader. This is about an ideology expanding and controlling the entire world. It's not about an individual. This is about a plan that's been taking 200 years.
That's right. It's a one world government plan.
Exactly. So to explain it to you, George Soros is the one that told everybody the Iron Curtain collapse happened. He was the one who paid all this money for all these revolutions to collapse the Soviet Union. Step one, trick the Western world. Accomplished. He's a liar, right? He's working with the Soviets. The globalist people are working with the Soviets. The second step after the Iron Curtain has collapsed is follow it. For 40 years, they've been infiltrating the media system, controlling it through money and resources, taking control, left-wing agendas everywhere to collapse the Western world by any means possible. And that to understand that really what's happening is that the moment of empire collapses, they told you to vote for this guy called Barack Obama. So Soros and his groups told you to vote for Barack Obama. This was a special election because it was the coup d'etat on America's system. And this guy, this Soviet plant, set up the smash and grab job and gave the enemy the various means to defeat the Western world. Precisely U.S. uranium. So we're going to talk about that more in the Patreon later. Let's move on. So Kamala is toast. Do you believe she's toast?
After the convention, whenever it's talking about joy, I don't understand. She doesn't bring anything to the table.
Nothing.
Is she toast? I don't know, because there's a lot of brainwashed people who are voting for her as the anti-Trump.
Right. Now, if you look at the polls, so Biden, when he ran against Trump, look at all the left-wing polls that oversampled Democrats. So Biden was up 3 to 6 points in all these left-wing crazy polls. Okay? Kamala is basically dead even right now.
Yeah, and this is during the honeymoon stage and during the convention where she should have a bump.
Right. And now the latest with RFK has actually dropped out and is now endorsing Trump. So RFK carried what? I think 1 or 2 points across the nation.
No,
he was
5 to 6 points in a lot of the swing states.
Right.
But he just got knocked out of New York by the DNC. The Democrats knocked him off the ballot in New York. So that's a big one.
Right. So now all his votes are basically, or majority of them are going to go now to Donald Trump. So this is going to be a big boost of Donald Trump. So we talked about how Joe Biden was basically put out because they couldn't cheat enough under Joe Biden. So now Kamala's in and we have a really big it's going to die. Okay. But there's going to be a surprise before the election, and we'll talk about that later in the Patreon.
Guaranteed.
So the next thing we have to talk about, we'll just talk briefly about your thoughts about RFK endorsing Trump. I mean, personally, to be honest with you, I've always thought the Kennedys were communist sympathizers, and this is going to be offensive to a lot of people, and maybe some people will unfollow me. But you're either two things. You're either for the Western world or you're for the enemy. There's no kind of middle ground. I've always thought that JFK knew that his military generals knew they could beat the Soviets back in the 1960s when all this stuff happened. And he kind of got out of hot water because they were both kind of at each other. And he's like, was communicating to Khrushchev that, let's put it this way. My generals and people behind me believe they can defeat you. Listen, this has to be solved. I'm a bad person. It just has to be solved. And the Western world has to win. And that's just the way I'm personally am. So, what's your thoughts?
Okay, my thoughts are a little bit different. I think
you're more moderate. You're a communist sympathizer.
I am far from that. I may be more moderate, but I'm certainly anti-communist. My thoughts are different with respect to JFK and RFK. I think that JFK understood there was a deep state within the United States.
Of course.
And even within that United States deep state, many of them were sympathetic, like you're saying, sympathetic with the communists.
Right.
They had that communist world vision. He talked about secret societies with secret handshakes and secret oaths,
right.
And that the CIA and the FBI should be smashed into 1,000 pieces. So I think his views is more aligned. His view is more in line with Donald Trump than it is with the communists. RFK is interesting. I think he would steal a lot of votes away from Trump for his 5-6% or whatever it is. But he would also steal a lot of votes from Biden, Kamala, and the Democrats because, he's a Democrat. So if they're not happy, the problem here is if they weren't happy with Biden, I don't know how they could be happy with Kamala, but maybe they would pick RFK instead of Biden because they thought, Biden is senile and has dementia. So I think RFK's votes are going to be split. Maybe they're coming a little bit more because they're the anti-vaccine, anti-COVID votes. They'd go a little bit more to Trump, but I think his votes are going to be split.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I think the RFK thing is really meaningless.
I don't think it adds too much.
There's too many people that are behind Trump, and I know that a lot of people in the States are all pro-Kennedy, and there's Kennedy kind of establishment, kind of like,
Well, Trudeau's have brothers for Kennedy.
Well, they just believe in the Kennedy family.
Yeah.
I personally don't believe in the Kennedy family. I never have. RFK, when he said he was going to take everyone's guns away, I was like, what are you doing? I don't believe this whatsoever. So I believe he's just a communist sympathizer. I always thought he was kind of out for his own monetary gain. I know that's not necessarily a popular opinion, but you want my opinion. So that's why you're listening to the show. Now, there's a bunch of stuff we have to talk about. Okay, so first of all, we're going to talk about the butt sex or the monkeypox. Everyone is talking about how this is the latest pandemic. This is not going to be the latest pandemic that affects the election. I'll tell you why. There's no way that this is going to spread all across the earth and affect everything in a monumental way in 2 months' time.
Well, didn't they? Hold on. Did they not try this? Okay, every 4 years there's a presidential election. 2020 there was COVID, and then they tried to slip in monkeypox, and it lasted about a month, 2 months, and people were saying, "Oh, I need a monkeypox vaccine," or saying you should get a monkeypox vaccine. It lasted for about 2-3 months, and then people realized, I don't believe in this. And so it died. That was supposed to be their next pandemic. And then they're bringing it back again 4 years later. Like, how stupid do they think people are?
Yeah, but I don't think it has anything to do with the election whatsoever. I think monkeypox is something, we're going to get to that on the Patreon. I mean, it's too in-depth and it's too crazy. We'll talk about more on the Patreon.
But COVID's coming back.
Well, of course, they're talking about COVID again because COVID is, as we told everybody, is the control mechanism. And we've explained how the vaccines, what we believe the vaccines are, what the purpose is, why Trump put them out ahead of time. And, that's an interesting story. We could do a whole show about the COVID vax. Now, just quickly in Canada, I want to talk about a couple things. The only thing about the Freedom Convoy,
Sure.
what's going on with the court cases and that kind of thing.
So I think the defense is almost rested with Tamara Litch's court case. But the interesting thing that happened is that I forgot the gentleman's name, but someone who was charged as a trucker with the Freedom Convoy, and his case was just dismissed. Very interesting because, and it's a loophole where how he got dismissed. But let me explain it to people. So this guy was arrested and he was put in the paddy wagon and then carted out. And there was no notification in the paddy wagon that he was being videotaped or being recorded. And so the argument that the defense made was there should be a reasonable expectation of privacy, even if you are in the police paddy wagon. Okay, I don't necessarily subscribe to that point of view, because if you're in the paddy wagon, you may assume that the police will be recording you. But he was recorded and evidence was used against him. And the judge ruled and said, no, if you don't disclose to the person or tell the person their charter rights are being violated, that they're being recorded without their foreknowledge.
Right.
So the judge threw out the case against this guy. And I think that has an interesting effect down the road. Won't necessarily affect Tamara Litch's case or Pat King's, but it does. It's nice that someone got free.
Well, the reason we're talking about this case and the reason we're talking about it in America from American listeners is because this is a monumental case from my point of view. The Supreme Court is going to decide what the limits are on free speech and stuff.
Right.
Regards to this, in my point of view, and like I told everybody, it's like we have the right to protest. It's said right on the charter. You have the right to peaceful protest. Now, obviously, when you get together as a protest, you get 1 million people together. There's going to be a couple bad apples. Now, the bad apples don't dictate for the rest of people, and people don't lose their charter rights based on a few bad apples. Right. But that should be a common sense case that people have the right to protest here in Canada. But unfortunately, what we're going through right now is that this communist ideology has completely taken over, and this is a really, really key moment in the history of Canada. So now, if you listen to the show, your Supreme Court justice, you should be ruling that this case is thrown out. This is a very, very, very simple case. Agreed. It shouldn't even be heard by the Supreme Court.
Agreed.
It's that obvious.
But hold on a second. I would just want to say one thing, and that is when we talk about bad apples, I really don't think there was any bad apples in the Freedom Convoy.
In fact, there was a few
There
plants.
were plants.
There were plants.
That's the point I want to get across. So yes, there aren't going to be bad apples, but they're not actually, they're plants. Just like they plant Antifa people, they plant BLM people. There were plants in there that unfurled Nazi flags, that unfurled, Confederate flags. And then we knew that they weren't part of the Freedom Convoy whatsoever. They were there to discredit the Freedom Convoy. That's what these communists, that's what these globalists do.
Right. Now, we're going to go to the Patreon because we've got a bunch of stuff to talk about. We're going to go over a few cases of what the scenarios are for the election. So I have 3 scenarios, what's going to happen for the election. All of them are pretty detailed, and we got a bunch of cool stuff to talk about. So before we leave,
that's important. That's really important.
Go to the Awakener.ca. You can view all the material there. It'll list what's happening. The Patreon literally is only $4 a month. $4 Canadian a month. It's cheap, guys. You get so much information. You get to support the show, and we're forever grateful.
That's like what, $3 US?
$3 US. It's just a cup of coffee. Join the Patreon. There's so much to talk about. We'll see you there.